Welcome to Beyond the Call, where history, leadership, and heroism come alive. Today's story explores Private First Class Thomas Eugene Atkins at the Villa Verde Trail in 1945, a powerful account of courage and responsibility in combat. If you enjoy learning more about military history and extraordinary individuals, you can find more articles, podcasts, and resources at trackpads.com. The story begins on a dark mountainside in Luzon, in the Philippine Islands, where a narrow trail winds through jungle and rock. Along that trail, an American infantry company has dug into a hill that overlooks a crucial bend in the road. Somewhere on the forward slope of that hill, on a thin spur of ground, Gene Atkins lies in a shallow foxhole, waiting to see what the night will bring. Before he was a Medal of Honor recipient, he was simply Gene from Campobello, South Carolina. Born in 1921, he grew up in a small town shaped by the Great Depression, where neighbors knew one another and work was a daily obligation, not a choice. His early years were not marked by grand events, but by the quiet routines of family, school, and the kind of chores that teach responsibility early. As war spread across Europe and Asia, he watched from a distance as newspapers and radio reports carried stories of battles far away. That distance shrank when the United States entered the Second World War. Like many young men of his generation, he chose to put on a uniform. He enlisted in the United States Army in late 1942 and soon traded the fields of South Carolina for the training grounds of the infantry. There, he learned to march until his legs ached, to shoot straight under pressure, and to move as part of a squad rather than as an individual. The Army assigned him to Company A, 127th Infantry Regiment, part of the 32nd Infantry Division, an outfit that would fight some of the toughest jungle battles in the Pacific. In that environment, a foxhole was not an abstract term. It was a shallow pit scraped into the earth that could mean the difference between life and death. Beyond the Call is the Monday feature of Dispatch, U.S. Military History Magazine. The Pacific campaigns taught Atkins and his comrades to respect terrain in a very different way from soldiers on open European fields. Jungles on New Guinea and later on Luzon pressed thickly around them, turning every ridge and ravine into a possible hiding place for the enemy. The Japanese defenders were skilled at digging caves and bunkers into hillsides and at launching sudden night attacks. For the 127th Infantry, progress often meant taking one hill at a time along a narrow road, then holding it under relentless pressure. The Villa Verde Trail was one such road, a twisting mountain route that had become vital to the American advance on Luzon. Holding ground along that trail meant absorbing the full shock of determined resistance. By March 1945, Company A had taken positions on a steep hill that overlooked a stretch of the Villa Verde Trail. The company formed a perimeter along the crest, a ring of foxholes and fighting positions that marked the edge of their control. To give early warning and break up any attack before it slammed into that main line, leaders pushed a small outpost forward onto a narrow ridge that jutted from the hill like a finger. Atkins and two other soldiers were sent to man that exposed position. Their job was simple in description and brutal in reality. They were to watch, hold, and buy time if the enemy came. In the early hours of 10 March, the jungle around them was black and close, lit only by a thin, pale strip of trail far below. The men on the ridge relied more on their ears than their eyes, listening for the scrape of boots on rock or the clink of metal equipment in the brush. Behind them, the rest of the company tried to rest in their foxholes on the main hill, trusting that this little outpost would warn them if danger approached. Time passed slowly in the dark. Then, around 3 in the morning, the stillness shattered. Grenades exploded among the foxholes on the ridge with a sudden violence that tore the night apart. Rifle and machine gun fire swept the crest, sending splinters of rock and earth into exposed faces and hands. Landmines and explosive charges turned the narrow spur into a string of concussions that shook the ground. In the first seconds, both of Atkins's companions were killed. He himself was badly wounded, a deep injury that made every movement agonizing. The most natural response would have been to crawl back toward the relative safety of the hilltop line. Atkins refused that instinct. He dragged himself to the edge of his shattered foxhole and began to return fire down the slope. Working the bolt of his rifle with disciplined, deliberate motions, he aimed at the flashes and silhouettes pushing up toward him. Japanese soldiers, expecting to find the outpost silenced, ran into a lone defender who refused to yield. Each time a group tried to reach the top of the spur or move into better firing positions, his shots cut into them or forced them to ground. One short sentence captures the reality. He held. The fight did not end quickly. For roughly 4 hours, enemy troops launched repeated assaults up the slope, using the darkness and the terrain to press as close as they dared. Atkins fought through those hours by managing his pain, his ammunition, and his fear. When one rifle overheated or jammed, he reached for the weapons of his fallen comrades and continued firing. At one point, the enemy brought a machine gun close enough to rake his position with concentrated fire, trying to drive him off the ridge entirely. Even then, he clung to the wrecked edge of his foxhole and kept shooting. By dawn, the ground in front of his hole was littered with enemy dead, later counted as 13 bodies. That number is more than a statistic. It represents 13 attackers who never reached the main perimeter. Atkins had fired hundreds of rounds during the night, each shot a decision to stay in place a little longer. Only when the immediate fury of the assault began to fade, around 7 in the morning, did he finally withdraw from the forward position. He crawled and stumbled back up the slope toward the platoon line, leaving behind a ridge that still belonged to his company. Medics and fellow soldiers met him with a mixture of relief and insistence that he had done more than enough. Yet, even in the rear, the battle was not finished with him. While he waited for more thorough medical treatment, still weak from blood loss, he continued to watch the broken ground around the hill. When he spotted a Japanese soldier who had slipped into the perimeter, he grabbed a nearby rifle, forced himself upright, and shot the intruder before the man could strike. Shortly afterward, he saw another group of enemy troops trying to move up behind the platoon's positions. Once again, he ignored his own condition, rose as much as he could, and fired until they turned back. Even from a litter, he defended his comrades. The official Medal of Honor citation distills all of these events into a compact block of formal language. It speaks of a forward position outside the main perimeter, of severe wounds, and of a soldier who refused medical aid to remain at his post. When it mentions that he occupied a precarious position, it describes that narrow, blasted spur of ground where every inch was under fire. When it notes that he held off repeated assaults for 4 hours, it refers to wave after wave of attackers who found their path blocked by the fire of a single man. The citation's reference to 13 enemy dead and hundreds of rounds fired suggests the intensity of the combat without fully capturing the chaos. Phrases like gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty can sound distant when read on a page. In Atkins' case, they meant staying in a torn foxhole after being badly wounded, knowing that each passing minute increased the chance that the next grenade or bullet would find him. They meant choosing to keep fighting after his companions were killed, rather than withdrawing to safety. They meant acting a second and third time, even from a litter, when he saw infiltrators threaten the very men who had just tried to pull him out of danger. His courage was not a single flash of action. It was a chain of decisions carried through under extreme stress. The impact of his stand reached beyond the small patch of earth he defended. By holding the ridge, he forced the enemy to confront a living barrier before they could reach the hilltop perimeter. That delay allowed the rest of Company A to wake fully, organize, and strengthen their defenses against any follow-on attacks. The hill remained in American hands, and the push along the Villa Verde Trail continued. If the outpost had been overrun early, enemy troops might have reached the main line before it was ready, with deadly consequences. A local failure could have meant a setback in the broader campaign. Atkins's story also offers a study in character. He was not an officer giving orders over a radio. He was a private first class whose leadership came from example rather than rank. His decision to stay on the ridge, his endurance through hours of combat, and his continued vigilance, even while wounded, all point to a deep sense of responsibility. Modern leaders, military or civilian, can see in his actions the value of quiet persistence, of accepting hard tasks without fanfare, and of protecting others even when personal hardship would justify stepping aside. One man's choice to stand fast changed the course of a fight. After the war, Thomas Eugene Atkins returned to South Carolina and resumed a more ordinary life. He married, worked, and lived among the same kinds of neighbors who had known him before he became a Medal of Honor recipient. Like many veterans, he did not spend his days speaking about combat, but the experience remained part of him. His name appeared on honor rolls and in histories of the 32nd Infantry Division and the Luzon campaign. His grave in his home state gives a place where family, veterans, and students of history can pause and reflect. Today, when people study the Villa Verde Trail and the long road of the Pacific War, Atkins's foxhole on that narrow ridge offers a human focus within a vast campaign. His story reminds us that battles often turn on the courage of individuals in lonely positions who might easily have chosen differently. Remembering him as Gene from Campobello, as well as Private First Class Atkins of Company A, keeps the story personal. It moves the Medal of Honor from a line in a book to the lived reality of a man who, in the worst hours of the night, chose to hold his ground so that others would see the dawn.